talk about our desserts. And I'm going to jump in because I did make some cookies, which I passed on to our guest and Kathleen, which were Butterfinger chip cookies. But I did admit to them, and I will admit to you that if I was going to be thematic, as I usually am, I should have gone down to Dylan's and just stolen some Oreos and passed them on as my cookies. But I didn't. I haven't done that since 4th grade, and I'm not going to start doing that again. So anyone else want to contribute what they're munching on for dessert before we get started? Unmute yourself, and we're glad to have you do that.
We should be having German Stollen. It's the wrong time of the year, but that's what we should be having.
Yep.
We're having sort of a dessert. We're having cheese, steak, crackers, and apples.
Wow.
Sounds like a healthy dessert.
Yeah.
I guess.
When you said we're having sort of a dessert, I was waiting for the bourbon on the rocks.
No such luck.
No such luck.
Maggie's got it. I'm stuck with Chardonnay.
There you go.
Oh.
Anyone else want to?
Yep,
anyone else want to venture?
I think. There we go. Hang on. I think Dunhams are showing their Girl Scout cookies.
Oh.
Very nice. Those are my favorite, especially when they're frozen.
Again.
You can eat the whole sleeve.
Yeah. All right. We'll.
It's midsummer, so I'm having strawberries and ice cream.
Ooh.
Good move. Good move.
Well, since somebody else had something unusual, I don't mind telling mine. I'm having avocado toast and dark chocolate.
Ooh.
That's kind of a good combination. I like that.
That's a great combination. I'm already thinking of the wines I would drink with that. That's great. Okay, well, let me just take a quick moment. I'm assuming all of you have seen our film, our little episode of last week tonight. We watched it a couple of times. It's very funny, but at the same time, it's very serious and very maddening and very sad. And it is a great way of looking at what is a larger problem. And the person who's going to share with us tonight is in a lecturer of museum studies at KU, Sally Strawn. She's also the deputy director for public practice, curatorial and research at the Spencer. I think I've got most of that right. She'll correct me, I'm sure. And I think I'm just going to turn it over to her and have her start the discussion. And as I said, any questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat.
Great. Well, thank you, Jack, and thank you for treating me to some dessert. And thank you all for being here. So I'm going to share screen. So I have a few slides as I kind of have a little kind of presentation to get us going. And I do have some questions for you kind of during the presentation. So I can't see all of you as well when I'm sharing screen. So just please feel free to unmute and speak up. I'd love it if you respond to some of the questions. I won't ask you too many, and then hopefully we'll have lots of time for discussion. And if something kind of you have any questions or you just want to share something during the presentation, I welcome you to unmute and share out. So please do. First question though, everyone can hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I'm gonna turn that over, make this bigger. Get the technology to do what I want it to do. And, okay, let me try to make it so that I can see maybe some more of you, but There we go. All right. Excellent. Okay, so if I look at you, I'm not actually, I turn my head, so I'll try to just look at my screen, but unmute yourselves. So as Jack shared, my name is Selka Strawn. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm at the Spencer Museum of Art. And I have a couple of images of the front of the museum on here. And I know some of you are familiar. Show of hands, who has been there in the past year, maybe? Oh, excellent. Great. So hopefully you've started to see some of our renovations, and kind of looks like this now. A few things have changed. But I wanted to kind of start by pointing out a couple of a series of works of art by actually a KU graduate, Hockey Ivy, Edgar Heap of Birds, his Native Host series. Is this a work of art that any of you have noticed before? And okay, Shelley, I see you nodding your head. Have you paused to look at it or kind of think about what it might mean? Or I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on this artwork, if anyone has anything, because it does relate in some ways, and in some ways oddly relates.
Well, I've seen it a number of places, including the Spencer and Crystal Bridges has some too. And I think, I'm not sure if I've seen it near the Nelson, but I have always been a little puzzled by why Kansas is backwards. And the explanation of that. But
yeah, so it's good that you're puzzled, because I think that is part of what he's trying to do, is to get people to kind of be puzzled by that. And yes, so this is his Kansas series at Crystal Bridges. It's the Arkansas series, and he has done this for a number of other locations and sites. So kind of that helps give a sense it is place-based artwork. So wanting to think about the place of Kansas. Other thoughts from people who have seen it, experienced it in person, or just what you can see on your screen? Yeah, why might Kansas be backwards, and what does the rest of it maybe suggest to you?
My understanding is that he was making a commentary about the original residents of the land we live on in Kansas now, native tribes. And then the irony related to tonight's topic being that some of these signs were defaced, stolen and or defaced. So it fits the topic as well.
Yes, and Nancy, you are not a plant primate. Yes, yes. So to think about the peoples who have lived and stewarded the land that we now call Kansas, and specifically in this slide where the University of Kansas and Spencer Museum of Art are located. And so the signs kind of reference some of the historic and contemporary displaced tribes now in Kansas. And as Nancy noted, gosh, about a year or two ago, some of the artworks were vandalized, and one of them was stolen, and it was recovered and is back on view in its original location. But I want for us to kind of be thinking about this recognition of native lands and native peoples, but also this concept of stewardship of works that might be considered cultural heritage, but also ideas of intangible heritage, but also stewards of the land and all that lives on the land, whether human or more than human. And why are works of art cultural objects? what do they mean and why are they important? So that's kind of an ongoing open question that maybe we can discuss as we go through. Oops, oh, I've got to get the slide to advance. There we go. So, asked you about some meanings for a work of art, but what is a museum? How do you understand what a museum is? And I'd love to kind of get some thoughts from you all. Can you kind of conjure up a museum? What would you say a museum is? And kind of feel free to kind of go at it from any way that you might think about what it might be.
Okay, I'll grab that one.
Thank you.
So museum has the word muse in it, and that's what I think about. When I think about a museum, it's a place to go and think and muse about what you're seeing, whether it's positive or negative.
Okay, excellent, good. What else?
When I see a museum, I think about learning something that I didn't know before,
Okay.
something new or unusual.
Excellent. Learning.
I think of a museum as a place where artifacts or relics tell us a little bit about our history.
I think about a museum as a transportation to another time.
Ooh, okay. And could that be going backwards as well as forwards, or I see
Mostly
Phil on
backwards.
here, so we could go in all sorts of ways.
Mostly
But-
backwards for me.
Okay.
Pertinent to this subject, we were in Arkansas, and they had an extensive, beautiful Native American museum that the Smithsonian's had its eye on for quite some time. What do you think about their reluctance to let it go to the Smithsonian, given this topic?
So a museum collection going to the Smithsonian?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
can you give me a little bit more background? Because it's not anything I'm familiar with.
I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the museum, but it's an extensive Native American collection, and it's so great that the Smithsonian had their eye on it for several years, and it's still in Arkansas. They haven't given it to them.
So does the Smithsonian have a right to even purchase that? And if these were artifacts that were found by people and donated to the museum, why do they have the right to sell that to the Smithsonian?
Yeah, so opening up lots of good questions. So speaking to this question of what is a museum, does it do, if it is a kind of space for a repository, we'll say, for objects, are they the only repository? Can they lend? Do they give away? Do they sell? What is their relationship to maybe other museums? If it's a local and the national comes in, I don't know if it would be like the Smithsonian thinking of it as a branch.
I think they just want it because it's so good.
So they want to
So,
acquire
and
it.
this is my point. Does it come down to a matter of trust? And why would the Native population really trust the Smithsonian?
Right. Oh, so it's an indigenous tribal museum.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I missed that. I didn't catch that. So those are good questions, because it's an interesting direction than I think a lot of places are looking to.
Can I throw in an interesting thing about that? When you say Smithsonian, that's a pretty broad subject. So is it the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indians that wants it? Or is it one of the art museums of the Smithsonian's? Because the Smithsonian Museum of American Indians, which represents Indians of North, South, and Central Americans, might be a different, might conjure up a different sense of why it would go there than if it was just an art museum within the Smithsonian collection that just wanted the art, because the Smithsonian has a cultural repository for Native Americans that I think some Native Americans at least think is a good place for them. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm just throwing it out.
Yeah, and I don't know the distinction of that, Jack. I wasn't told one way or the other what
Yeah.
Smithsonian it was, so I can't answer that.
Shelley was there too at the Native American Museum. Anyway, moving on.
So Dave, I want to hold that question to come back to at the end too. So I jotted it down, but help remind me because I think it'll help go with some different directions. But yeah, thinking about who are the people involved and why it's important. And so I want to kind of share with you a recent definition of museums that was ratified by ICOM, which is the International Council of Museums. And this was many years in the making with a lot of debates. And so some of what you all shared kind of comes up, but some of, it researches, collects, conserves, interprets, and exhibits tangible and intangible heritage. It's for the public. And then we have the operate and communicate ethically and professionally with the participation of communities. And this connection with communities is something I'd like for us to explore. And then experiences for education, as several of you mentioned, reflection, enjoyment, and knowledge sharing. So wanted to kind of keep that in mind, and one could go and look at various earlier definitions and other definitions that if you're interested in this big debate, I think it speaks in some ways to some of the issues that we'll be discussing with this idea of stolen art. But ICOM, I also wanted to bring up because they're a really important international organization, and they have quite a number of laws and committees and working groups that focus on restitution. And they have something called the Red Lists for cultural objects that are at risk. So kind of practical tools for dealing with and to kind of curb the illegal traffic of cultural objects. And that's something that John Oliver kind of talked about at the end, that it's not just something in the past, it is something that is still happening. They also have a very important code of ethics, and that is one that the Spencer adheres to. There's also different countries have their own organizations. Here in the United States, we have the American Alliance of Museums. And I have a bunch of links that I will share with Jack and a PDF version of the PowerPoint for anyone who is interested. So do we have any lawyers in the group by any chance? Or anyone who worked in the law? Nope. Okay. Well, I was hoping we might have some legal expertise in here. I wanted to kind of look at this work that is called, as you can see, the Louvre Stele, and with the Code of Hammurabi, or Hammurabi, I'm not sure, but I say Hammurabi, but any classical scholars, please correct me. Why do you think it's called the Louvre Stele? Asking kind of an obvious question, but yeah, please, Kathleen.
But is it, I mean, it is in the Louvre, and
Yep.
Was it stolen? I don't know.
That is a very good question. Why is this ancient code of law,
That's right.
a kind of Babylonian legal text from kind of 18th century BCE, that in the Wikipedia entry says it was rediscovered in 1901 at the site of Susa in present-day Iran. So, and But then it does say it was taken as plunder in the early 20th century, and has been in the Louvre and is kind of called, renamed the Louvre Stele. Oops, go back. So not there yet. So this really important foundational, very extensive kind of legal codes and explanations of text that kind of form the basis of many laws and have inspired many, was stolen and taken and set up and is a major important work in the Louvre. And the Louvre is a kind of, John Oliver really focuses a lot on the British Museum, but the Louvre is definitely one, and a place for kind of a lot of Napoleonic plunder, for example. And I wanted to kind of, there's a recent book by a well-known art historian, scholar named David Josselet, on a book called Arts Properties. And he's really looking at how artworks have been captured, seen as a kind of as property, and as a way to legitimize power. So I think, Dave, this might start to kind of speak to some of what your questions and this kind of big national power of the Smithsonian. So something to keep in mind. And he talks about the Louvre and talks about it as being this paradigmatic first democratic museum. And it was kind of appropriated artworks for the religious and the aristocratic, and then all of the kind of colonial imperial campaigns across the world. And there were calls for repatriation from the moment that works were taken. And so it's not something new. And he writes, and I have on here, that his kind of a key point for him is that the museum, so kind of getting to what is a museum, is a kind of institution that is founded on taking things out of their context and putting them together in order to create narratives of power and authorization. Because why steal things? Yes, you might make money off of them, but that's been part of it, but a much larger part has been these issues of power. And what happens to works like this Stele and many others when they are removed from their original location or their source communities and placed within a museum context. And I think John Oliver kind of, talks about some of how it kills the work, and we might kind of think about that as our museums mortuaries in some ways, and what might that mean and what happens. So, and then thinking, and this I think goes to Dave's earlier question, what happens with these ideas of ownership? And I think John Oliver kind of says, well, at what point do we, or he gets someone saying, well, do we just keep going back and back and back? And at what point do we stop? Everything would have to be returned in some ways. And I think these are questions to consider along with others. So this is the Louvre. And now I'm going to go to a place that is closer to home. Does anybody recognize what's on the screen? In the Kaw language, it's called Njuje Wahobe.
The sacred stone.
Red Rock.
Yes. Oh, all very active local citizens. So yes, the sacred red rock that can also look like this. And so where is it located for those of you who might not know?
Constant Park.
Robinson Park.
Yeah, it's right by the
Robinson.
river.
Sorry. I had the park
Yes.
next to it.
Yes, but it will not be there for much longer. And it originally was in the river, and was for centuries very important, a sacred rock for the Kaw Nation. And it was known that it was a very important rock, and was removed by European colonial settlers and placed in Robinson Park with this plaque put on it to commemorate kind of the pioneers and colonial settlers. And it is now, after many years, many decades, going to be rematriated to the Kaw Nation, to land that the Kaw Nation has purchased in Council Grove. And I believe that will be happening this fall. If you're interested, and I will send the link, but there is a website about the Sacred Red Rock Project, and it is being funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to bring the rock to a place where it can be cared for by the Kaw Nation. And if you're particularly interested and you're free this Sunday at 2 p.m., this month on Sundays at 2, those involved with the repatriation of the rock have been doing tours and activities. So this Sunday at 2 p.m. is the last one for this month. And I think there will be in August, before the rock is rematriated, brought to Council Grove, there will be a Lawrence public celebration, and then there will be a ceremony the following days for when they move the rock. And so this is kind of a major project that's happening here in Lawrence. It's not tied with the museum, but these issues are not only tied to museums. And the Mellon Foundation is one major organization that is working with tribal nations and tribal museums to support the rematriation of important culturally significant works. And they even have a new funding opportunity called the Going Home Fund, Returning Material Culture to Native Communities. So Dave, when you kind of brought up that question, it really kind of sparked my interest, because things are trying to move in the opposite direction than what it sounded like you heard. So at the Spencer, one of our new collection galleries called Displacement, and I apologize for the somewhat blurry slides. I was not able to get higher res ones of this. Tries to deal with this, and if you notice, it might be really hard to see depending on the kind of screen, but the Kaw panel that Native Edgar Heap of Birds did with the Native Host series, the one that was stolen was actually the Kaw panel. Before we were able to recover it, we had commissioned him to create another panel. And so since we were able to recover the stolen panel and it was not damaged, we have the second one in the gallery. And part of our kind of text for kind of introducing the gallery calls a bit on that definition that I shared that the ICOM recently ratified. And my colleagues write, museums care for collections of objects identified by researchers as important to keep, protect, and share. As Western art museums reckon with their colonialist past, the ways museums collect and display objects must be re-examined. So I really welcome you all inviting me and to kind of talk about some of these issues, because it's not something that we can do alone and internally. And how I kind of want to raise questions about how do we care for art objects, cultural objects, artworks. And I wanted to kind of add this also on our kind of introductory gallery text about the term displacement and displacing objects and people, but people also have transformed and continue to transform such experiences to evoke new and emergent forms of agency, forging cultural acts of recovery, repair, and inspiration. So I want to kind of also not only have it be about all of the horrible things that have and continue to happen, but that Native art, African art works from countries that have had the countries and peoples and lands and sacred and cultural objects damaged and stolen continue to survive, and people continue to create and to work through. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, okay, so that I can see you all better.
Stelka, I'm sorry, while you're going, but I don't mean to interrupt, but there was an interesting question that
Great.
came up in chat I wouldn't pass on. What happened to the Native American artifacts in Spooner Hall? Is it open to the public again? I know some of the answers, but if you could fill us in on that, that would be great.
Yes. So, and I kind of was going through things, and
Well,
want
sorry.
to thanks, because that opens up what I wanted to share a bit about NAGPRA as well, which is the Native American graves. And now I'm going to forget the acronym, and I should have spelled it out. Repatriation Act. So Spooner Hall originally, and my cat has decided to make his appearance, originally was a library, the library at KU. It then became the first art museum when the library moved to Watson. When the art museum moved into the building that it's now in on Mississippi Street, I'm kind of shortening the timeline, but then it eventually became the Anthropology Museum. The Anthropology Museum was closed in 2005. In 2007, the 19th and 20th century works, the quote unquote ethnographic collection, came under the stewardship of the Spencer Museum of Art. The archaeological collections are under the stewardship of the Biodiversity Institute Natural History Museum. When the Anthropology Museum was created, I think it's in the 1970s, Native American artworks that were in the collection of the Spencer Museum of Art, that some of which were part of the founding gift in 1917, were transferred out of the art museum because they were seen as not being fine art, and transferred to the Anthropology Museum. So some works came back under the care of the Spencer Museum of Art. And so as to whether they can be seen, they cannot be seen at Spooner Hall. There's no display space there. And currently Spooner is closed for public events because there are ancestral remains that are housed in Spooner Hall. And so I will, when I share links, KU now has, there was a kind of, rediscovery of the ancestral remains, and KU is now returning to kind of work on these issues, and has a repatriation website, has hired a NAGPRA manager who will kind of handle beyond NAGPRA, but starting with that. There was a lot of work done, NAGPRA work done before when the Anthropology Museum closed, and many works, I think works were returned. Predates me, and I'm not sure I have all the information, but it's still ongoing work. NAGPRA has changed. We continue to learn more. But some works from that collection are on view in the Spencer Museum of Art, and we will be having other works on view. I hope that was probably a very long answer, but hopefully opens up some more questions as well.
Well, I'd like to mention that same thing. As a fairly young child, touring my hometown museum with the Girl Scout troop, there was a portion of Indian burial mound with bones sticking out, which troubled me a lot when I was a little child. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to visit that museum, although it's moved into a different location. And I asked the lucky Dawson, what has become of that? And she said, we're negotiating on it, which seems to be what KU is doing, how it can be given away. There is a 3-part series on Freakonomics on this very subject. And one of the things that comes up in the Freakonomics on giving things back, it's a whole lot easier to get items than it is to give them back. So it's a problem. How do you want to make sure it is going to be handled safely and goes to the right people. So it's a difficult subject.
Yes, it as in often it's easier to destroy something than it is to fix it. And want to work really carefully and respectfully. And I think not, and different tribes have different various resources in terms of their human capacity to handle all of this, as well as kind of monetary resources and having tribal museums. So I think that's why the Mellon Foundation has created that Going Home Fund to help support tribes. And yeah, that not only were artworks very important cultural objects, sacred objects, taken sometimes quite forcibly, so much else was destroyed. It's not like you can easily go, it's like it was before and things can easily go back. Yeah.
Well, I'd be curious just to hear from folks on what you thought of the episode, because I thought it was entertaining. I'm not a huge fan of John Oliver. He's got kind of a crazy delivery, but I thought he made his point pretty persuasively. The thing I think that my favorite part was at the very end where they were in the it was the guy from the Big Sick movie. I can't remember his name, but
Payback Museum.
yeah, the Payback Museum, where it's like, people were taking these things and not thinking anything of it, but then you put it in a perspective of, well, if somebody lopped the nose off of Mount Rushmore, that would be a big deal to us. And I thought that was a really clever way of bringing home the point that, these are things that were really important to folks, regardless of, the time of the history or whatever. But I thought that was really interesting. But I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on his whole approach to presenting this topic.
Well, I thought that it's a difficult topic and it's a very serious topic, and it's got a lot of issues connected with it. But he had such this tremendous sense of humor.
Yeah,
it sort of took the edge off, and it made it easier to listen to. So you could actually, I feel like for myself, I could actually absorb some of the issues better, because sometimes it was just so funny. I mean, I laughed out loud. But the situation is not funny,
right?
But the way he presented it was, and actually I thought that was a good way to present it. It was more, I don't know, more absorbable, and it might even have more of an impact, especially that last part where what did they call that museum at the last?
Yeah, the Payback Museum.
The Payback Museum.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of puts it in perspective.
Yeah, I thought it drove the point home really well.
Yeah, that was my opinion.
He also made some really interesting comparisons, like when he said the Solomon thing and giving the baby back, and is the foster mother good enough? And he said that baby was kidnapped. They're not mentioning that. And I think a lot of times his humor just painted a picture that was really accurate.
Yeah.
And like Kay said, easier to to absorb.
Mhm. Yeah, there's some pretty cringy moments when, especially the interviews of the curators, you know, where they talk about how, you know, the original owners weren't capable of taking care of their own stuff. And that was like, that was kind of horrendous.
Despite the humor, or with the humor, he really made it absolutely clear how outrageous and arrogant this
Mhm.
behavior has been over centuries.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of controversy over, like in Great Britain in particular, over some of the stuff that the royal family has and has collected over the years. I guess it's all in the British Museum, but yeah.
There are
it's-
also the royal collections that
Yes.
that aren't as accessible as the British Museum.
Yeah.
I think he made a good distinction, or I think I felt that the distinction between cultural objects that he talked about to a great extent, and I'm going to say versus art, but I don't mean that they are not art, because an artist has a right to sell their art, but on the other hand, there are things that weren't sold and were taken, or there were things that, whether they were sold or not, are very cultural, and I think that makes a very large thought about. I mean, even the people who would defend a museum holding objects would probably be the very same people that would say the Nazis should have returned all their art. So I guess it depends on if you're a good guy or a bad guy, and I think that's part of the complexity of it, is thinking all of that, you know, makes people, you know, wonder what's, you know, what it is. I mean, every one of us has been to almost every major museum we've ever been to in any big city and seen a mummy. I mean, if we disinterred somebody in your family and moved them to another country, but nobody ever thinks twice about all of that kind of stuff in museums. I mean, that doesn't even necessarily belong in a museum at all. Any museum, anywhere. You know, I don't know. It's pretty complicated.
It gets more complicated because of some of the stuff that happens along the way, because you were talking about mummies. There was a time when they were grinding up mummies to make, they thought they would somehow like rejuvenate people. So they were grinding them to dust and consuming them. And I personally find that a lot grosser than the idea of it being in a museum.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
pretty
there's
gross.
a question in the chat from Cade. Does anybody know how the Nelson Atkins does with repatriation? Selka, do you have any thoughts?
Don't and I haven't actually heard anyone talk about it. So I know that they have been searching for a new curator for Native American art. I know they do a lot of work on provenance, and I think looking, what I'm aware of, are more kind of European American works in provenance. But I'm sure it is much more extensive. They also, so it's Native American, but they have a huge Asian collections, South Asian and East Asian. So I'm really not, and they do have a strong African collection too. So I'm not really sure if they have any particular person who's working on this and what they have put out. So I'd have to do some looking if they have a web page or discussion on their website. I'm not sure. That's a really good question, and I will be looking it up. And I think Kay, you also noted that, you know, it's up to, so working with Native American artworks, but working with any source communities, descendant communities, it's really up to the community members what they would like done. And is it having the museum, you know, continue to store and take care of the work kind of in that way, but the community members, what kind of access will they allow the museum to continue to display, or be like, we need you to continue to care for this until we are ready to be able to care for it in our community, but you cannot display it, you have to store it in different ways. Like there's a whole number of ways that communities will approach it.
There's another question in the chat from the Behringers regarding corpses being dug up. The study of the Iceman, now in Italy, gave scientists a lot of new information. Is this justified? So,
and these are, I think, questions that are being asked with a lot more seriousness. I think they've always been asked, but I think more scholars are really considering this. I know some Egyptologists and conservation scientists and conservators who work with ancient Egyptian mummies are really questioning the ethics, and also the kinds of research questions that have been approached. And I know that some of you are KU faculty and have worked in research, and you know, how are the research ethics developing in your areas, and particularly ones that connect with other humans. And I'm curious kind of other people's thoughts, and if Jill and Phil have anything behind that question. Sorry.
Selka, what are the 3 most sensitive objects in the Spencer, and exactly what are you doing with them?
I don't know if there are 3 most sensitive, and I guess sensitive how and to whom, and we're still kind of learning. And so working with the new NAGPRA manager, and we'll work toward identifying source communities with artwork. So some of the many complications are we don't have the records, and we don't necessarily know with what source community to contact, because we might not know enough about the information, like we don't necessarily know where it came from, or other ways to maybe identify. Don't always, I think specialists might have some ideas of what works might be sacred, but we don't necessarily know, and it's really going to be up to the tribe. So I'm sorry I'm not able to answer your question, but yeah, please follow up so I can try.
So you don't know what tribe it came from, or
sometimes we don't.
Wait, but if you know what tribe it came from, wouldn't it be a simple thing to say, let us give this back to you? Regardless of the provenance, what white people had it in between. Why can't you just give it back to the tribe?
Yes, so it's reaching out to the tribe, and then waiting for them to respond. So yes, and that process has happened with many things, and is ongoing too. NAGPRA has made it. It's not just every single object, and they're kind of types of objects, and so starting with those.
Yeah.
Did that respond somewhat, or do you have? Okay.
One other point I thought that the program pointed out was, so what, it's in London, you're taking great care of it, it's going to be preserved and all that. A lot of those people that it was important or sacred to can't make it to London. So we're just out of luck.
Exactly. Yeah. Sylvia has kind of an interesting comment. It says there's a fabulous free museum in Golden, Missouri, just a few miles from Arkansas, that a wealthy local businessman has collected much bought from the black market. University of Arkansas wanted it, but after researching most of it, would not touch it. The lack of provenance makes it worthless to researchers and archaeologists. Same for the Smithsonian, they don't want it either. So now he can't sell it as a collection at all. So I mean, that's certainly a new development, you know, with these additional questions that people are asking. So it's a good thing.
It also it also gets into the idea of if something was looted by a person of the country and they sold it because they're not able to make a living in any other way in that country because it's a poor country, and then handing it back to the government, which has helped keep that person poor. It's kind of, there's this whole kind of political thing going on of, you know, who does it really go back to? Who deserves to have it? Is it, you know?
I think along with that, we had the whole scandal of the, what was it? I think it was called the Museum of the Bible. And it turned out most of the stuff was stolen. And I guess, but I never had reports of where it ended up. Does he still have it? Did it go back? Who did it go back to?
But Jack, a whole lot of it is also faked.
Yes, some of it is fake.
A lot of fraudulent stuff.
That was true, but there were some other things. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you hear these stories, but you don't know necessarily the resolution.
There was something I either read or saw recently. I do think some of the works were returned to Iraq. So I don't know of everything.
Yeah. The other thing that John Oliver brought up that was interesting is, you know, if we gave everything back, the British Museum would be empty. And all I could think of when he said that is the correlation of too big to fail economically here in the United States, which also makes me laugh. But, you know, if a museum has everything in it is not necessarily equitably purchased or sold by the artist or whatever, maybe they don't have a right to exist. And, you know, we don't always think of that because the museum becomes more important than what's in it.
It was interesting. I was in Winnipeg, Manitoba last week and went to the Art Museum of Winnipeg, and they have a whole section, a whole floor and section on the Inuit art. But it is all loaned by the tribes, or if it's ancient, it is approved by the Inuit people. And in fact, they have they also then have created a cooperative relationship so that the current artists of the Inuit community are creating art and they're displaying that art in their museum. So it's a cooperative effort of what they're doing, and that promotes the artist, and then that artist gets to promote his own his or her own works outside of the museum, you know, by selling them and so forth. And so that to me would be an ideal kind of situation, would be that sort of cooperative kind of relationship.
I think the same thing was true with the Smithsonian Museum of American Indians. I know, at least in part, there's a large number of objects that are on loan from Haskell,
right?
That had a good collection, and they're on loan there. So that's why I asked about, you know, where in the Smithsonian the other stuff was going, because I think there's a very much display but not own feeling of that museum in the Smithsonian, the one of the American Indian Museum there.
Well, that museum, the American Indian Museum, started not too long ago, and that was started by, you know, Native Americans, and the Native Americans were very involved in getting that established and keeping it. So that makes a huge difference. We hope.
Winnipeg example, thank you for sharing that. And that is kind of an ideal that I hope that many museums are working toward, and a really great example. So thank you. One one challenge, and when I was looking up some of the icon things, is that when museums collected works and the ways they tried to preserve them, and John Oliver talks a little bit about this with the Elgin marbles and how they tried cleaning it and scrubbed it, but they would, with many works that might have organic materials, used a lot of kind of pesticides and poisonous toxic materials. And so before returning works, knowing what has happened to them, because you certainly don't want to cause further harm. And so that is a major issue that a lot of institutions are working with source communities on as well. And kind of gets to what are these notions of care and how have things been cared for?
I hate to be the arbiter of time here, but that's kind of my job. We're getting close to the end of the hour. I want to at least have a little time to say thank you. This has been one of the best discussions I've participated in our Dessert in a Movie, and really a lot of contributions. So I want to thank Selka for this and really appreciate her contribution. So
Thank you. Bravo.
Thank you all. And please come check out our new galleries, see native art that's on view, contemporary and historic, as well as other works. And we're planning probably more likely in the spring discussions about how works come into our collection, and different things we're doing. And I will share with Jack the PowerPoint then, the kind of that will have the hyperlinks, and keep an eye on what KU's doing and updating with the repatriation process. So please stay in conversation.
okay, we'll be sending out the link to the recording of this for the library YouTube site, and I'll send that along with it at the same time once that's done, so you can have both. And if there's any other links to any websites or something you think of, Selka, we can add that to it as well. Please just email me and I'll send that out. I have to apologize because for some reason on my computer, I'm dealing with a black screen, so I don't see any images, but I can hear everything. So I'm going to close it up for the evening and thank everybody for joining us. And we'll see you at the next event. We did do a tour of the